this from multiple shots and angles. I'm going to put it up online afterwards so that anybody that's not here can watch it, and so that we can all watch it in the future and laugh at how funny the planning and preparation side of the actual adventure is going to be, right? At the very end, I'm also going to do a question and answer session. So if you guys have like the notes app on your phone, or you have a piece of paper and a pen, please jot some stuff down. I'm going to cover a lot pretty quickly. So while you're doing that, I'm going to just quickly introduce myself and go over a little bit of how I decided to land on this huge adventure of mine. So to begin, there's a few big adventures that I've done in the past. The first was when I was 18. I walked across America. It was 4,300 miles. It took me about 11 months, and it totally, fundamentally changed my life. I learned to appreciate the outdoors, to live outside and all of that. And, I got totally addicted to it. So the next year I went on the Pacific Crest Trail. The year after that I was on the Florida Trail and the Appalachian Trail. I went out to New Zealand the following year. And then all between, I had a bunch of different jobs all over the place. I was a street musician in New Orleans for a couple winters, which is really fun. And for the past like three or 4 years, more or less, I've been here in Moab working as a whitewater raft guide. Along the way, I've seen some really incredibly beautiful places. This is Thousand Island Lake on the PCT in California. Seriously stellar. You guys should go there if you haven't seen it. I got to see the Great Plains when I was walking across the country. Walking through Kansas, everybody always says like that must have sucked, but actually it was pretty awesome if you get off of I-70, and the people were really, really kind to me. It's big sky country. Like you can watch storms like this come in for hours before they actually hit you. I got to, one of the most physically demanding challenges of my life was the Florida Trail, because I was moving at best like a quarter of a mile an hour in the swamps and bogs and sloughs. But the trade-off with that difficulty is that the abundance and diversity of wildlife there is astounding. It's truly amazing. You see I saw hundreds of things every day that I'd never seen or even heard of before. And then of course, I moved to the Desert Canyon country here in Utah. And I mean, compared to some people, I haven't been here for that long, but I've really fallen in love with this place, and this is what shaped me as a person now. As I said, I've learned a lot. In a very literal sense, I've learned what to carry with me and what not. Obviously, that was like, I don't know, maybe day 20 of the hike across the country. That thing's almost as big as I am. But in a larger sense, I've also...
What were you, like 12 right there?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it took my 12-year-old beard. It took me 12 years to grow that beard. But yeah, in a larger sense, I also learned what to carry with me and what not to carry with me, like figuratively speaking. I learned a lot about my wants and needs, because it literally manifested itself with what I carried on my back. But hiking out in the middle of nowhere, there were so many times where I might want or need something that I couldn't immediately fulfill. So that totally shaped my perspective and taught me to live minimally. And that's ultimately what's allowed me to keep adventuring like this. It's not like I won the lottery or something to afford all of this. It's just by spending very little and using what I learned in backpacking back in the real world. Whitewater raft guiding has been this incredibly unique experience where I found the chance to share this accumulated knowledge with people, stuff about geology and biology, about human history, and most importantly, about conservation. You know, it's not hard to see the value of wilderness or the fragility of the ecosystems that we call wilderness. But sometimes it takes that personal experience to really make it stick. And you know, with the amount of time that I've spent outside in my adventures, I've been personally confronted by the reality of our changing world too many times to count. I've seen really intimately how all of our collective wants and needs have shaped our world, our communities and our ecosystems. I mean, Lake Powell, like some of the people here know exactly what I'm talking about. Trying to take a boat out at the top of Lake Powell when the water's been so low for years, it's difficult if not impossible. And that impacts me every day. This is the kind of thing that makes my job harder because Lake Powell is so low, and that reflects our use of water and also our changing climate. It's kind of a heavy thing to have to see every day, and you can't not see it when you're trying to take a boat out of the water. You know, I've also seen a lot of other things on this interface, right? We often separate like mankind and nature, but that line is very blurred. It's hard to draw distinct lines between that. Seeing the impacts that we've had on ourselves and our ecosystems has given me this really tremendous call to action, to examine and to ask people about our collective wants and needs, and to ask myself those same questions. To see what all of this looks like in reality in every community and every ecosystem, and to try to piece together how we've arrived here and what we might be able to do about it. So I've decided to go out and see it for myself in a really big way. This is a 56,000-mile hiking and paddling route across every major ecosystem between the Baja Peninsula and the island of Newfoundland in Canada. You know, all in all, I'm thinking it might take me 10 years to do this, but to start, I'm going to break down the route and talk about how I designed this and what all of those colors mean. And then I'll talk about some of the logistics of tackling a trip like this. I'll talk about my goals, like the big capital P sense of purpose that I have for doing this. And then I'll wrap all of this up with some ways that you can get involved, because I'm going to need a lot of help if I'm going to do this. All right, so I started from the experiences that I've had hiking on the trail. I learned about this resource called Trail Dino, and they've got a map of essentially every long-distance trail corridor in the United States that has its own trail association. You know, you can see in this map that there are some trails that might be familiar to you, the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail. There are some trails that are more conceptualized. They might be routes. And there are also big holes all across the country where there aren't really long-distance overland corridors. Working on the river like I had, that really opened the door for me to start exploring our riverways. And you can see that particularly in the Mississippi River drainage, these major rivers fill the gaps that exist in the overland routes. So what better way to go and explore that area of the country than on the river? Not to mention, those river corridors are some of the wildest areas left in these places of very high development, right? So in the interest of time, I'm not going to cover every single part of this route. It's a lot. It's a really hard question to answer when somebody asks, so where are you going, right? Like, yeah, right, it's going to take me a little while. If you're curious, there's an interactive map that I've got on my website, Dudetrek.com. It's right on the homepage. So you can like go and zoom into your neighborhood or see where your friends and family live along the route and what I'm going to pass through. This represents about 4 years worth of work. And when I first started doing this, it wasn't with this idea in mind. I was just piecing all of this together for fun so that I could have a master map of everything that's out there to be explored. It's only been in the last like a year or two that I started to take this idea seriously and figure out how I might be able to tackle it. The first thing that I had to consider was how I could tie all of this together in a timeline that makes sense. So how I can travel through each area in the ideal season. I certainly don't want to be in northern Canada in the winter, and I would prefer not to be in Baja in midsummer either. So turns out you can do this sort of like you do birds migrate, right? As summer is approaching, I can be heading north. In the middle of summer, I can go up to higher elevations. As winter is approaching, I'll move south and I'll go into lower elevations. The math of this is kind of tricky. If I were to do between 16 and 23 miles per day, depending on where I am and how reasonable it is to go far, I could do this in exactly 7.62 years. Without any days off and with no days between traveling.
Just like Navtech.
Yeah, that's basically 7.62 years at least. Of course, there are some things that might make that difficult, like a heavy snowpack or a flooded river or severe drought. That's this kind of thing that's going to make me have to hike faster or slow down or even stop entirely and go to another section because the conditions are not ideal there. So like, yeah, on the flyer it said a 10-year-long adventure, but like, as far as I know, this could be the rest of my life that it takes. I'm just gonna go out there and try to tackle it and have to be adaptable. So to give you an idea of how this ideal weather window works, I have a one-way ticket down to San Jose del Cabo at the southern tip of Baja on the 30th of December this year. That means I'm about 56, 57 days away from leaving. When I hit the southern tip of Baja, I'm going to start in, call it the 1st of January, and hike up to northern Washington by mid-June. Then I'll scoot over a little bit on the Pacific Northwest Trail and southbound the Pacific Crest Trail, ideally by the middle of October. That will keep me in the perfectly ideal weather window for 10 months and 6,400 miles. Of course, when I get to northern Washington, I may have to wait for snow, but I'm going to worry about that next July. Yeah, so again, 8 to 10 years, something like that, because Mother Nature is going to dictate my pace. In addition to considering this ideal weather window, there's a lot of different gear that I'm going to need too. I mean, these places demand a different set of gear. There are places where I'm going to have to carry a ton of water. There's a stretch in Baja with 140 miles with no fresh water. So that's something. Yeah, so one of the things I'm going to do in Baja is I have these desalinating water bottles. It's a steel bottle that I can boil seawater in. It'll condensate in a copper tube and I can drip fresh water. It's literally a still, which means that I can harvest agave and make my own tequila. Yeah. This is going to be awesome and also keep me alive in a very literal way. So, in addition to water, this is where I'm legally required and morally obligated to have a bear canister. There are places where I need an ice axe and traction devices like crampons. You know, in the North Country, I might need snowshoes depending on what the year is like there, or skis or a sled. I have a very lightweight pack raft that I can use for some of the flat water sections of the river. When I get to the big whitewater, like here on the Colorado, I'm gonna need a bigger boat. And then the most interesting thing to me, the thing that perhaps I'm most excited about, is what they call the Great Loop, which is this blue circle you see all along the East Coast. Essentially, you can go from the headwaters of the Mississippi down into the Gulf, around the East Coast, up the Hudson River, and then back across the Great Lakes, all the way to the headwaters of the Mississippi in a 7,000 plus mile route. And for that, ideally, I'll probably need a sea kayak. And a lot of different gear storage along the way. If I were to do this in a continuous fashion, that means I would have to paddle in the middle of winter at some point. So if I'm not in Florida, that probably means I need a dry suit and I need a lot of other gear. In order to fulfill these gear demands, a lot of the stuff I already have just from the experiences that I've had adventuring in other places. But the thing that's really going to save me is gear sponsorships. I've worked with them in the past, and it's really mutually beneficial. I mean, it's a no-duh, right? Like, for them, I can give them extremely thorough gear reviews and show off their stuff and all that. So that's one way that I plan on tackling all this gear. And another thing that I had to consider, land and water accessibility is a really tricky one because there are enormous sections of private land that I'm going to be walking and paddling through. So whether I'm in downtown LA or I'm on some farm along the Red River in Oklahoma, I don't want to get busted for trespassing. You know, I don't want somebody to wake me up in the middle of the night. I'm also going to be walking around the road a fair amount. And that's another thing that I have to be aware of for my own safety. I don't want to get hit by a car, and if there's another way that I can go, that'll probably be better. The analog for that on the river is probably like a barbed wire cattle fence stretched across the river and a really bushy trail corridor on either side. In order to solve some of those private land issues, it's going to mean a lot of networking. Like, I'm going to have to talk to the local people about what the best way is to go, because even though my route concept from Google Earth is really sound, on the ground it's going to mean a lot of different things. It may be no surprise to you that there are some public land access issues that I'm going to face as well. The Grand Canyon really exemplifies this. If I'm to do a source to sea route on the Colorado River, that is entirely contingent on me getting a watery permit for the grant. I can't run the trip until I have that permit, and that also means that I'm going to have to apply to that every year, and when I get that permit, I'm going to have to go there and figure out the logistics and gear as necessary. So yeah, that's going to take a readiness to adapt my route. As dreamy as it would be to do this in a purist fashion, I'm going to have to go and do different sections depending on how I can access that land. Obviously, there's some safety considerations. This stuff is simple. We should all know this. Map and compass. I've also got a GPS on my phone. It's 2019. I can keep that being charged pretty easily. As a backup, I also have the Spot GPS locator beacon, which is helpful for my mom because I can say, "I'm okay, it's all good." But also the button that I intend to never use is what I like to call the "oh shit" button, and that will save me if I really need it or not. One thing that I'm really interested in is how leave no trace principles are going to change in each one of these areas. Like, where do you bury your poop? In Baja or in the Everglades or in an alpine area with fragile soils, or here in the desert with the biological soil crust, right? How do you choose your campsites? I mean, we all know about the leave no trace, but it's going to be way different in every place, and that'll take like constant and considerate thought about how I can leave such a small impact on the environment. But my point of talking about all of this is to just accentuate the fact that the long-term nature of this trip is laughable. Like, I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't think I possibly could. It's ballpark 10 years. There's so much that's going to change in that time. The trails are going to get better because trail maintenance is going to happen all the time. Some trails might pop up that don't even exist yet. Our environment is going to change drastically in the next 10 years, and I'm going to change a lot. All of us are. No matter what you're doing, if you live for the next 10 years, you will be a different person by the end of those 10 years. I say all of this because this is the plan. This is essentially par for the course. So I can shoot for par, I can shoot over or under par. What's most important is that I go out there and play the course, right? Okay, so with all of this stuff in mind, here's where I'm going to start to break down some of the bigger goals that I have for this trip, the stuff that goes beyond walking and paddling. The first and most important is to leave no trace. I'd like to learn from local people, to work with experts, to share their collective stories, and of course to have a bunch of fun. It's going to be stellar. So these are the capital P purpose that I've built for this trip. So I'm going to take some time to explain what each one of these means to me and how I intend to accomplish all of these along the way. First, I just intend to leave the smallest measurable impact that I can. And this goes way beyond like campsite selection and pooping in the backcountry. So a few weeks ago, I started measuring everything that I consume and all of my waste as well, all of my food, my water, recycling and compost, all of my energy needs, and putting all of this into an Excel spreadsheet. And I've done this so that I can establish a baseline for exactly how much I use, especially while I'm still living here in Moab. I know that when I go out backpacking again, I'm going to use even less. That's going to be really easy to minimize my needs out there. But by having this baseline, I have a way to take measurable steps. I can prove mathematically from how much I'm using that I am lowering my impact all the time. The tricky part is with the indirect impacts. So if I buy food from a store, even if there's no plastic packaging on that, it got to that store somehow, right? What are the costs of energy it took to get that food? Those are kind of complicated. So it's going to take a lot of research. It's going to take a lot to figure out where all of that comes from. But the idea is trying to establish this baseline so that I can continually use less. Things are not created from nothing. And even though we often might say that we throw things away, they don't go away, they go somewhere. So this is what I want to find out. This is what leave no trace means to me. I really mean it on every level. I want to leave the smallest impact that I can. And if I'm going to talk about reducing all of our collective impacts on the world, if I can do this as a way to try to inspire others to at least consider the impacts that they're having on the world, I've got to walk the walk if I'm going to talk the talk. See what I did there? There's a couple of those in here, so be ready for some more. One thing is for sure, though, meeting the locals is going to be one of the easiest and most enjoyable parts of this entire adventure. I mean, you guys are the prime example of that. For you guys to all show up is so rad. Like, I'm so excited to meet all of the people that I meet along the way. And here's the thing. Over the next decade or so, I'm going to be walking and paddling within 100 miles of the entire population of the lower 48 states, the Baja Peninsula, and the Rockies and the Appalachian Mountains in Canada. So 100 miles away from something like 330 million people. If I can keep going, I'm literally going to meet millions of them face to face. I stick out like a sore thumb with my backpack on, walking down the road or even walking down the trail or whatever. Many people say, hey, are you okay? I don't know, but I'm not hungry or thirsty. You know? So in meeting these people, I've designed these 5 questions that I've tried to keep as objective as I possibly can. You know, if you know an anthropologist friend of yours that can help me make these more objective, I'd be happy to hear it. But this is what I'd like to know from everyone that I meet. First, how do you fulfill your most basic needs? So like food, water, shelter, clothing, and sleep. Everybody does that a little bit differently, so how do you do that? What else do you need? What else do you need to support your lifestyle? What else do you need to recreate and to raise a family? You know, everything else that's not part of your survival needs, what are they and what does that look like for you? What do you do with your waste? Shocker, everybody poops, right? And most of us, I mean, virtually every human being on the planet has solid waste that they use as well. So where does all of that go? That's going to look really different for everybody as well. On a broader level, what does your community need? And what does your ecosystem need? So the first of these 3 questions are entirely universal, right? No matter who you are or where you live, we all have to fulfill our basic needs for survival. We have to support our way of life, and we have to deal with our waste. The answers to these first 3 questions should shed some light on the infinitely many ways that we relate to our resources and form a baseline for our collective use. The last 2 questions, I should say, these will provide a broader context for all of our collective experiences. So how much do we know about where our resources come from and how the natural world makes those resources available to us? To answer these last 2 questions fully, though, this is probably going to take some expert help. And who and where are these so-called experts? I mean, I'm not an expert in every one of these areas, so how do I find that help? Well, follow me here because I'm about to take you down a very deep rabbit hole. In the research that I've done to design the route concept, I became familiar with this idea of ecoregions, which was initially formed by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and then later adopted by the World Wildlife Fund and the Nature Conservancy. Essentially what these are well-defined, delineated sections of land that, while they may vary highly in size, they're all defined by the continuity of living and non-living factors that make them unique. So the Colorado Plateau is one, for example. And there are certain geological, biological, climatological, and historical differences between it and, say, the Florida Keys, for example. Right? But also between the Colorado Plateau and places much closer by, like the Great Basin. In addition to the map of all of these ecoregions, the World Wildlife Fund has a treasure trove of information about what these specific differences are, what the environmental issues are that are going on there, and the groups and the individuals who are working to address these issues every day, with citations and references included, which is great for me because this is how I got into the rabbit hole. I made a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet of every single one of the ecoregions, and I've been adding to it as I go, the more that I learn. Try to get a general sense of what's going on in each of these. I started with the areas that I'm going to pass through in the first year. Through Baja, along the west coast, in the Pacific Northwest, and on the Pacific Crest Trail. Checked every single one of the references for all of them. I started plowing through a ton of books.
Into a desert place. Nice.
I know, right?
Graham McIntosh.
Yeah, Graham McIntosh, man. What a fantastic book. Guy walked 3,000 miles around the coast of Baja back in the 80s. Crazy. And reading these books in particular, people like Graham McIntosh, it's given me this variety of interesting perspectives. It's not just about natural history, it's from the perspectives of adventurers and whale hunters. We used to get all of our light from whale oil. Yeah. Talk about the interface between mankind and nature, right? From cowboys, from archaeologists, from naturalists and historians. In addition to reading all of these books and gaining this prior knowledge, I also mapped out every single national park, every state park, every wildlife management area, every marine sanctuary, every mine, every landfill, every oil field, every museum, every fish hatchery, every conservation group, every adventure club, every historical society, I mean, the list goes on and on. I have a huge, massive compilation of data that I've gathered just in the past few months, and there's no signs of stopping yet. All of this in an effort to try to build a contacts list of local experts. And most importantly, so that I can approach them with some prior knowledge, a solid fundamental understanding of their area of expertise. That way I can ask more poignant questions and be able to digest some more technical answers. Through their help and their guidance and their experience, this is what is going to allow me to weave our stories, the stories of the local people, with the context for those stories, the history, the geology, the biology, right? And how our communities and how our ecosystems form. And this is kind of what brings me to the next goal of mine, to share their stories. And in 2019, what this looks like is mostly digital. In addition to posting regular blog posts and photographs on Dudetrek, right? I'm really excited for this part too. I'm going to be producing a podcast series and a series of YouTube videos. The beauty of the podcast is that it can be consumed passively. So when you listen to a podcast, often you do it while you're like cooking in the kitchen or driving in your car. Plus, you can condense a book's worth of information into a couple of podcast episodes. Like, how many of you guys actually listen to podcasts on a fairly regular basis? Right. Do you know what the most popular podcast in the world is right now? It's Joe Rogan's podcast, the Fear Factor guy. Yeah. And he has like 3-hour-long podcasts that he releases every couple of weeks. That's a ton of content. And it's the most popular podcast out there. So if I want to share a ton of data like all of this stuff that I've researched, the podcast is a really cool way of doing that. The YouTube videos are kind of the opposite end of this spectrum. I mean, let me be frank, like if I want to get this information out in a way that accommodates our very limited time and attention spans, right? YouTube is a great way to do that. If I can get onto the other side of your screen for just 5 minutes with an engaging video about walking in someone else's shoes, figuratively speaking, then I'll consider this a great success. I'll be sharing all of this stuff on social media, and I'll also be reaching out to magazines and newspapers and radio shows and all these other content creators online to try to reach the widest audience possible. The more people that are made aware of what I'm doing and aware of how other people use and need, right, the more people that I'll be able to interact with personally, the larger the network will grow, and the wider the breadth of stories that I'll be able to tell. Also, by the way, did I mention it's going to be a freaking excellent adventure? It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to make a lot of new friends. I'm going to see a lot of beautiful places, and I'm going to celebrate every day. This is the kind of thing that brings me the most happiness and fulfillment. So I'm really, really stoked to go out there. This trip is years in the making. And now, 50-something days out from the beginning of my adventure, I've decided to do this public talk and to put it online so that I can document everything that I've done so far. But I've also decided to give this presentation so that I can ask for your help. This is what I've been doing now for the past 2 months. As much as this is an adventure that I'm personally embarking upon, it's the story of your personal relationship with the natural world that I seek to tell. And in that sense, you're both the audience and the content creator. When compiled and shared to a wide enough audience, this is what can help us learn from all of our experiences and to be united in this common interest of supporting our communities and supporting our ecosystems. This is going to take a lot of data, honestly. You know, taking all these videos and recording all this audio and writing every single day and posting photographs. I'm not going to have regular access to the internet, which makes processing all of that exceedingly difficult. It means I'm going to have to actually find the internet, like a physical location for where that is so that I can use it. Thankfully, I have my phone. As I said, it's 2019. Over time, it's probably going to get easier. Things like this will be made easier for me with access to a computer. And you know, to get some insight on how to manage these two things, of how to do this huge grand adventure, and also like do the opposite of checking out, right? Be as connected as I possibly can. I reached out to this woman named Fidget. Fidget is her trail name. Her real name is Bethany. She's a part of this project called Her Odyssey. Her and a woman named Neon have been hiking and paddling from the southern tip of South America. They just finished the 4th year of their adventure, and they're now entering Canada, on their way to get to the northern tip of Alaska. So I thought Fidget would be a perfect person to ask how she manages all of this, how she uses her time. And what she had to tell me is that it is absolutely exhausting. That it's like having 2 or 3 really demanding jobs without any pay. And honestly, she does most of this work herself, but she's also got a team of people behind her to do all of these things, and it's still exhausting for her. So if realistically, I want to have any chance of doing this in a meaningful way, these are the types of human resources that are kind of necessary to help me do all this back-end work and to regularly create that relevant and engaging content to a wide audience. In this sense, the first thing that I'm going to ask of everyone is mostly for your time. I have not yet figured out how to clone myself, and until I do, I'm going to keep asking. I'm going to keep trying to get in your face and ask for some help with this stuff. If you've got any experience in one of these areas, or you have friends that work as a content creator or as a translator or whatever, please contact me. The way that I see this is that this could be a great opportunity for someone who already has experience to essentially get themselves into the professional field, right, to further their own career. I have a ton of stuff that I'm going to be pushing out there, and I don't really have the time to manage all of it. But if somebody has the time to manage some of it, that's a way that they can make something out of nothing, out of whatever I'm doing. They don't have to go out and hike there to get all these cool videos to edit and make videos of. So in an ideal world, there'd be like this massive team of people and like Nat Geo style guiding me down the trail and drones flying in. But in lieu of all of that, like in the meantime, I can use a little bit of help from local people to try to leverage this wider audience and try to make some really big impacts. Also figuratively speaking, of course. In the meantime, I'm asking you to do the most simple and mindless thing that I can possibly ask anyone to do. And I'm going to stare right into the camera when I say this. I'm going to ask you to subscribe, like, and comment below. There are other people that are going to watch this. Hello world, hello digital world. Right, it is kind of funny, right? It's kind of funny for me to ask this of you. But your engagement is not only what's going to help me figure out what works and what doesn't as far as content is concerned. Totally transparently, your clicks and your likes and your shares are what push that forward in the social media algorithms, right? Like when I first posted this thing about going on this hike, it blew up, and I tried to follow it through the internet and had a really hard time doing so because more people were like sharing and liking this. That's how this stuff grows. So when I come out with a video or a podcast or whatever, I'm not asking for you to universally like and comment everything. What I'm asking is for you to just honestly say what you think, to just engage, right? If you really liked it and it caught your attention and you watched and listened to the whole thing, yeah, sure, share that and subscribe so you can keep watching it in the future. If it did nothing for you and you fell asleep in the first 2 minutes, tell me how I can do better. We all watch YouTube videos and listen to that stuff, so give me some advice on what you think would be best. If you hear someone's story, because this is something I have a strong feeling is going to happen along the way, I have no agenda, right? I genuinely want to know how everyone would answer those 5 questions. I have a feeling that in sharing these stories, it's going to piss some people off when you hear somebody else's opinion. That's just the way of the world now, it seems. And if it pisses you off, tell me why. Comment and say, I can't believe they said that, Just engage and participate and take the time, take the 2 minutes to get a glimpse into the unique set of experiences that are going to come through walking in somebody else's shoes. Okay, yes, everyone, it is now a time for me to break down the 4th wall and to ask you for your money. Okay, now before you all go running off like I'm some kind of snake oil salesman and I'm asking you to bankroll my 10 years of unwarranted vacation, let me explain exactly how I intend to finance all of this, because this is arguably the largest aspect of this trip. Okay, so first, my goal is to use as little as possible, right? That is what is going to help me keep my finances to a minimum. And yeah, I've got some savings that I can stretch out farther and farther the more I learn how to use less. But practically, I will still have some basic costs. I still need and want, right? I'm going to have to pay for some of my basic survival needs. I'm going to have the cost of phone service to update regularly. I'm going to have really bad health insurance. And I have that spot device, which also costs money for me to press that oh shit button. The ace up my sleeve for a long time has been my guitar. I know that if I have that in my possession, I will never go hungry. So this could be the last time that you hear from Dudetrek, but know that I'm not going to die because I couldn't get myself food. The guitar is my peace of mind. But again, practically, that's not a sustainable way for me to try to do all of this, especially with this whole ideal weather window thing. So just this week, about 6 days ago, I sent an application in to register my own nonprofit, which is called Low Impact Discovery Corp.
Put a lid on it, man.
And the nonprofit is what's going to allow me to collect donations, to generate revenue through things like sponsorship, through ad space, and through paid content that I may write for some other content creator. The money that is generated through that nonprofit will go directly to local sustainability and conservation groups in every area. So, for example, here in Moab, we have SUA, the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. There's Living Rivers. There's community rebuilds and rim-to-rim restoration. There are groups like this all over the world, and in every place that I'm going to pass through. And these are the groups that are making a difference to try to help to save our ecosystems and make our communities more sustainable. In the meantime, as all of this is going along, I'm asking you to get the ball rolling. Oh, there we go. That's where all of us were. And to contribute to the GoFundMe, which I just posted online maybe 2 hours ago. So you can check it out. It just went up. And my goal is to collect $6,400 by the end of next year, which I think is really attainable. $6,400 because that's $1 for every mile that I'm going to walk from here to the end of the Pacific Crest Trail, which is only 10 months, actually. It's going to be more miles than that by the end of the year, but who cares and who's counting, right? So, yeah, the next step in the planning and preparing for this adventure is to tell Moab's story. And this one is really near and dear to my heart. This is why I'm so glad that all of you showed up here today. Because the first series of podcast episodes and YouTube videos, the first little blast of content that I'm going to put out there is about our connection to the local environment, which I know in Moab is particularly meaningful, right? Our relationships with the outdoors are arguably closer than the vast majority of people, at least in the United States. So it should be a really interesting opportunity for us to tell the world what it's like to live in Moab and to be surrounded by a tourism industry, right? Whether you work for tourism and recreation, if you work for the Park Service, or the BLM, or the DNR, if you work for the city, or for oil and gas, or the potash mine, or the wastewater management facility, if you work for the bowling alley, or if you work for the Rio, I want to know what your relationship is with our natural world. I would like to hear what your answers are to those 5 questions. So here's the call to action, everybody. I set up a clipboard on the table right here for those of you that are in the room right now to try to start a contacts list. And I'm going to be doing regular interviews, and it's very lax, right? I even put on the homepage of Dudetrek, I just put a digital form on there, so you can type in your answers and send them via email. But I think it'd be really cool to get some audio of this as well. So if you sign your name up, I'm going to be contacting everyone and trying to organize this on a schedule along your time. It should only take maybe 10 or 15 minutes max to answer those really basic questions. And I can also do it over the phone. I just figured out a way that I can do that. So if you live out of town and you're not from here, that's still possible. If you would like to do your interview immediately following this presentation, I am happy to do so, and I am logistically prepared for that, but I would like to do them individually, and that may take some time for us to all wait in line or whatever, so it's probably best if you're interested to sign your name up and for me to reach out to you I've also got a journal over here, this little black binder. And that I'm inviting all of you to sign your name in or to draw a picture, because I'm going to bring that journal with me down to Baja, and I'm going to have everybody sign. When I make my way back to Moab a few years from now, I'm going to bring this journal back into town and be able to show you guys like actual evidence of all the people that I was interacting with along the way. So yeah, to wrap all of this up, I've got a couple specific goals and a couple different ways that I think you might be able to help me. If there's any way that you think you can participate in this, whether it's like a thumbs up on the internet or referencing me to somebody that you know that might be able to help, I'm open to everything. And I'd like to especially thank you guys for coming out and listening to me ramble for the last 45 minutes. Thanks. Okay, so yeah, questions and answers. Holly, let's begin with you.
So, are you going to have a timeline of where you're at specifically on each location? I mean, within days or hours or minutes or?
Whoa.
Yeah, the spot device is a great way to do that. I can do regular, like every night, in fact. Every time I send my mom the like I'm okay button message, that'll automatically go to a map on the homepage of the website. So you may not, like the stories, me writing, it's going to be a little bit delayed. But if you are in some random town in the middle of nowhere and you like were hoping to connect with me on the way, you'll know that I'm 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 or 7 days out of town. It's up there now.
Will you need somebody to bury some stashes for you, or to put some food ahead for you, or anything like that?
Actually, there are a couple very specific places where I'll really need that. The desert trail is one of those places. It's on year 2. I'm going to start down here and walk through the whole Great Basin, and there are distances like 100 miles with no water in the middle of Nevada. As I said, that's like year 2. Also, Baja. 140 miles without water in Baja.
Woo!
I don't know if any of you guys are going out to Baja this winter, but that would be sweet. If you guys could drop some water out there, otherwise I'm going to be drinking ocean water. What's that there? Going on to Baja, sweet. All right, I'll talk to you. Right. Yes.
Okay, so this question is a little compared to everything that you just said, but I was looking at your picture from Florida, and I saw that you were in a swamp,
Yes.
straight through a swamp. And my biggest fear would be the crocodiles. My biggest fear of any hike is the animals. So would you say that maybe like trusting that the animals are just being animals and not as scary as they seem? Do you think that works? Or like what is your relation to the wildlife around?
Sure, wildlife interactions specifically, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's my biggest
get a whistle. Yeah, the way that I'm going to preface all of this is that the animal that I am most worried about is humans. Close second are dogs, unneutered domestic dogs, just from people I know that have hiked for that long. That seems to be a really common theme. As for like actual wildlife, like grizzly bears and stuff, there are certain things you can do, like having a whistle or bear spray or bear canister that can mitigate some of those issues. But the way that I see wildlife interaction in general is to like understand the how and why of them messing with you.
Yeah.
So like if I know, great example is like water sources. Like I am so particular about not camping close to water, especially in areas where there's like mountain lions, because that's when like mule deer come down to get water to drink at night under the cover of darkness. And that's when the mountain lions are like hanging out in the background, like, oh look, like hiker burrito in his little hammock. So it's like little tricks like that, like to try to understand the how and why of the reasons that those animals might want to mess with you. As for the crocodiles, I didn't see any crocodiles in Florida because there are alligators there.
Alligators!
But even the alligators, like there was one time in that photo that was up on there, that was in Big Cypress National Preserve, just north of the Everglades, and I probably saw like a few dozen alligators every day, like as close as I am to you.
Yeah.
And there was one time where I was like sloshing my trekking poles through the mud and I like disturbed this alligator, and from this far away he like swished his tail to swim away, and it almost knocked me on my ass. The current like pushing me over.
Wow.
So like at a certain point I can't avoid wildlife interactions, but there's a lot that I can do to at least minimize the effects of those. Phil.
There's crocodiles in the Everglades.
That's true. That's true. No, that is
Early
true.
crocodiles.
There's an entire national park that's dedicated. What's the national park on the north end?
You know what I'm
Biscayne
Biscayne,
Bay?
but also Everglades
In the
National Park,
Glades.
there's alligators throughout it and crocodiles. It's a lot.
Yeah, crazy. Okay, thanks. Another thing I gotta say about that. I'm gonna have to start watching the crocodiles. Yeah, pythons and all that. Okay, Phil.
How many repeat miles are there? And in the more segmented areas, what is your principle for LNT for getting to and from those segments?
I see. Well, Phil, I know that you've hiked on the AT before, so I'm going to lick every blaze. Every blaze on the trail. No, like what we're talking about is the purest through hiker mentality, you know, especially on the national scenic trails. There's this idea that like I cannot miss a mile, and like if I go to resupply 50 miles away in town, like it's not a real through hike if you hitchhike to go to town and then hitchhike to the same spot. But like, yeah, dude, I don't care. Repeat miles? I bet you there'll probably be quite a few repeat miles because there's going to be a time where like I hit the wall, like I get stopped by snow 40 miles out in the middle of nowhere, and I cannot keep going. You know, so there are going to be times where I have to turn around, and also times where I might just want to go and do it again, man. Like, ask me again in 10 years if I had any repeat miles, you know? Yes.
This is, I guess, a three-part question.
Mhm.
Are you limiting yourself to one person, you, even if you meet your BFF or
Sure.
he or she might wanna join you? No. And when did you say you might start? And are you, interested or wanting to expose yourself with this exact format to other states and cities and?
And I think with that third one, you're saying doing an event like this of some kind, right?
I'm sorry?
For your third question, are you talking about like doing events like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so.
Traveling to expose your.
All right, so I'll go in reverse order. Yes, definitely would like to do some of these events, and I think there's a lot of cool ways of doing this. Having this PowerPoint or some close version of it is really helpful because these are the fundamental questions. Like, so many people have asked me like, where are you going, and how long is it going to take, and what are you going to do about food, and like one of the huge reasons that I've done this is so that I can just cover it all. I'm like, oh, okay. I'll answer the one question, but if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, watch the PowerPoint presentation. So for me to do this in the local communities, it's going to be really helpful to engage with them and just give them like the basics about what I'm doing and what I'd like to do. As far as the second one was where I'm starting or when I'm starting, right? I'm going to start essentially on the 1st of January at the southern tip of Baja. Yep. So that the weather will still be kind of nice there, and I'll be headed north. By the time I get to San Diego, it might be like March, April.
Where hot air lives.
Yeah, hot air is down there. I have to look for scooters.
Oh, so you don't have much time, you've got like 2 months.
Yeah,
How are you getting to the tip of Baja?
Expose yourself.
I'm flying actually.
Cheater.
Yeah, I know. It's gonna be really exhausting. Freaking tiring. I've been practicing, man. Okay, all right, hold on. All right, let's keep it. Need to get some elephants in here to control the to answer your first question about hiking with people, heck yeah. Like, actually, I'm really, really stoked to do that. I think that's going to be a really neat way of like learning about locals and someone's like individual perspective. Like, I mean, in the next 2 months, my call to action to Moab. If you want to sign up and go for a hike, like, game on. Let's go hike. Let's go paddle. Like,
There's conflict with y'all standards of pooping or eating or walking or how much you use
sure.
with any given environment.
Yeah, I see. Like, there's one like sort of methodology. Really, it's just a phrase, but there's this thing that I was made aware of on the Appalachian Trail where they say hike your own hike, which is a really condescending way of saying like do whatever the hell you want to do. But the way that I see that is like, again, I'm doing this because I'm really passionate about it, but I'm also kind of cynical about what we use and how we do that. Like, I know that we use a lot, and it might bother me, you know, but like, oh, great example.
Save the world.
My parents, sorry guys, my parents are like some of the worst about this. Like the way that I see them use stuff is appalling to me. But I love my parents very deeply, and like I really enjoy going to see my parents, and I learn a lot from them, and I know that they learn a lot from the crazy things that I do.
So you're not gonna let it affect you, you're objective and.
I hope to be. I mean, of course I have my own implicit biases, but yeah, I mean, that's the goal. And this is why I tried to frame those 5 questions as objectively as I could. It's not like when I first wrote those down, the first question was, how do you fulfill your needs? And then what else do you use, right? But lining those questions up in that way is kind of suggestive, like, oh, well, outside of your basic survival needs, like, do you really need that stuff? Or like, yes, actually we all need those things, you know what I mean? Like, we all have to get transportation, and we need to wash our clothes, and there's bigger stuff like that. And I've intentionally left it vague so that whatever someone's own perspective is about how they use or what they might do when they go and hike, how they poop in the backcountry, like, do you? You know, I'm just here to listen.
One man's trash is another man's treasure.
True that. True that. All right.
Is there one place you're most trepidatious about, like that you're like a little kind of afraid?
There's one place that I'm trepidatious about.
Yeah, you're a little concerned. You're a little
Moab.
like the South.
Yeah, actually, you know, interesting answer to that one, Polly. The places that I'm the most concerned about, personally, are gigantic urban sprawls. Has historically, for me, and just in general, presented like some of the largest problems with trying to travel on foot. It's ironically really difficult to find a place to sleep when you're walking through an urban area. Like, unless you have this big network. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've like slept under a bridge and then still been like woken up in the middle of the night by some other under the bridge sleeper who's like, get out of my bridge, you know? And most of the time it's been fine.
So mountain lions, pythons, grizzly
Oh,
bears,
I would-
no big deal, but the people.
Still some kind of deal, but like traffic for more than anything, like figuring out where to sleep is hard. Traffic is truly dangerous. There are the most amount of close calls I've ever had in my whole life is walking down the side of the road with traffic. People have rolled down their windows and chucked full 2-liter bottles of soda out at 90 miles an hour on the road. Phew, like straight past my head, trying to hit me on the road. And people will, you know, rolling coal. Actually, I love rolling coal. Like, it makes me laugh every time. You downshift and go, wah, and it blows up this huge cloud of smoke. I get coal rolled quite a bit. And that's always fun to me because, yeah, because then I just go like, yeah! Heck yeah! Sweet truck, bro. Bet you couldn't follow me into the backcountry though, even with those wheels. So yes, trepidatious, is that the word? That is what I am most trepidatious about.
Jonah, what about your waterways, man? Most exciting for me. Like, what are you gonna go down Missouri and Mississippi? What's your attack on that?
Right. So the way that I figured out these waterways was actually I mapped out every single waterway that's more than like 100 miles, every single one in the whole U.S. And if you want that, I'm happy to share that with you.
Yeah, cool.
I have digital files of all that. But then with this like ridiculously huge, like if you know about mapping stuff, it was a 120 megabyte file for a map, which is freaking humongous. Like that's so big of all this data. So then I went through and looked at all of the rivers and tried to figure out what was reasonable. So a great example is the Colorado River in Texas that runs right across the middle of the state. Half of the time, like 3/4 of that river corridor doesn't have water. And all of that is private land. The Colorado River then, as soon as it starts to get water from this huge spring that's a really popular tourist spot, then it passes right through downtown Austin.
Oh, great.
And is super polluted and nasty and dude, the Rio Grande, right? Like paddling on the border, that's gonna be exciting, especially once I get out of the wild and scenic areas. But so part of the ways that I chose the river corridors was just from like how possible it is, right? And then also to be representative of each of these ecoregions. Those big, like the colorful ecoregions I had on there were how I mostly determined which routes I would be taking. And even though rivers like the Colorado River in Texas are like probably impossible to actually through paddle, you know, I can always like walk in the dry wash and like bushwhack onto the road because there's like some sketchy thing and then come back and like.
What about big highways like the Mississippi?
Yeah, dude. Other than big urban areas, the lower Mississippi corridor might be what I'm most scared of because barges. Because it is the most controlled riverway I've ever seen. Like I said, I lived in New Orleans, man. Like I lived in there 2 winters in a row, and I never went out on the water because it scared the piss out of me, man. You know, all the huge boats. But it has been done. It has been done, and on long sea kayaks that are more stable than my little pack raft. So we'll see.
Cool.
Yeah. So.
So first thing is just a quick comment. I'm really glad all this energy you're putting into this is toward this because there are people who like would love to put this amount of effort into more less good things than something like this. You know, this is some supervillain energy.
You should see my skull-shaped islands cave.
And you're gonna bring your guitar the whole way.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. So another side thing about the podcast, like I never have to get free, like royalty-free music. I can do the intro, I can play the music for the thing, but like I'm really stoked because every time I've ever gone out hiking, like dude, on the Appalachian Trail, I traveled with like a thru hiker band. Traveled with another dude with a guitar, there was a dude with a plastic trumpet, I brought my tambourine, and they were egg shakers, and like we would show up at a shelter like 60 miles away from the trailhead. And there'd all be all these other thru hikers. We were like in a parade, like walking down the trail, like jamming. So to be able to record that stuff is like super. That's universal. Again, like it doesn't really matter like who you are, or what you're into. Like jams, man, the jams.
Is like instrument weight and instrument safety a concern? Like falling on guitar.
Do you mean safety for myself by the instrument, or do you mean safety
No,
for
like,
the instrument like myself?
Would like your guitar like getting smashed into a million pieces be a worry? Or does it have a case?
All right, totally nerdy here. I have a carbon fiber guitar. Yeah, I have actually. I've used my guitar to paddle a canoe down the river before, and I've never tried this. On the video, on the like homepage of that guitar company, they have a dude like underhand pitch a softball, and he just like whacks the crap out of it with the back of the guitar. Totally fun.
Cool.
Yeah. As far as the guitar affecting my own safety, as long as I know how to play La La Bamba, I'll be fine.
Do you play us a tune tonight?
I actually, yes, open mic night. There's open mic night at Woody's, now starting at 8 winter hours, and I'm going to be there playing some music tonight. It's usually a really good crowd of people that play. I will yodel if asked.
He will yodel. It's
I'm
great.
happy to yodel. Kelly.
Alright, so you said, you're saying you have a bunch of gear that you can use, but you can't possibly carry it with you all the time. Are you like having a base camp here, like having someone be like, this is what I need at this day, send it to me? Like, I would help with that.
Yeah.
Get to the chopper! Like the helicopter flies in, like drops a sea kayak down.
The wellness center can be base camp for all your gear.
Oh, we're just gonna go drop you off.
Actually, that's not a bad idea. So, yes, Kelly, like, I'm super flexible with how this works. I know that there are a lot of people out there who will be excited to like share their like wear my jacket and then bring it back. This jacket had 12,000 miles. You know, like, I don't know if people are gonna want me to. I know people are gonna be helpful with gear. My dad has been helpful in the past to help organize like mail drops and stuff for me. And if I need like the sea kayak is the one that I always use as an example because that's hard. It's a hard thing to ship and get to myself. But a lot of the time, gear sponsors will help me with that a lot. Like by the time I get to where I need a sea kayak, like if I haven't convinced the sponsors to ship me, then I'm doing something wrong. Either that, or I'll go back to the North Shore of Wisconsin where I worked as a sea kayaking guy. And get all the Ojibwe people to teach me how to build a birch bark canoe. Take a couple months off trail, build my own canoe, and then paddle down. It's alright, because I have a birch bark canoe, and I forgot about the world. Like, at that point, I would have checked out. I'm eating squirrels on the go, weaving my own basket backpack. Can be done.
I have the plans if you want them.
You have what?
I have the plans if you want
Cool. All right. We'll talk about plants later.
What kind of shoes are you wearing?
Okay. Hey. Well, I know. This is a stock question. This is the one that everybody asks. I know I've probably told this to you before because I really love them, but of all the hiking I've ever done, the most miles I've gotten out of one pair of footwear was a standard pair of Crocs. I wore these chunky mountaineering boots when I first started to hike across the country because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And I got maybe 800 miles out of a pair of like legit mountaineering boots. I got 1,300 miles out of one pair of Crocs because I could I pronate, so like the back of my heel gets worn first, so I could shave down the rest and flatten it back out. And then just have this was while I was on the Florida Trail, actually, so I was wearing Crocs. In order to keep my Crocs from getting sucked into the mud, I had gaiters that held my Crocs on. So in the swamp, I had my own Crocs and gaiters that I brought in. Although I'm pretty sure the Croc Man is trademarked.
No, you're like.
Maybe the trademark expired. I don't know what to talk about. Yeah, rock the Crocs. Probably my guitar. Rock the Crocs.
You still selling sweatshirts and t-shirts?
No, I don't know, dude. Merch is a funny thing. Like, I don't know exactly how I feel about that. Like, it's more stuff.
I'm my merch man.
I don't know. Maybe this is a question that I can ask you guys. Like, this is one way that I can start to look for really tangible suggestions. Like, you're not the first person that's asked me that actually about t-shirts and stickers, right? Like, on the one hand, it's my personal thing. Like, I know. Do you see the problem that I'm getting at?
Like all day long.
All hope is lost. Like, people are gonna keep using more stuff. So what's the difference of having a Dudetrek sticker? Maybe that will outweigh the costs of having a bunch of stickers, right? Or merch or something. But like, there's got to be some creative solution to this. Like some like not like really renewable thing. Like, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it because I have my own sweatshirt and like I'm good. Yeah.
Magnets, Jonah. People love
Yeah, magnets.
How do they work?
Rolling pin. I thought about lighter holders. You know? Lighter koozies, right? That would be pretty cool. Yeah, some like hemp beer koozies.
How old are you?
I'm 25. Oh God. Should have been the cute lady right there. All right, guys. Thanks again for coming. Hey, one quick reminder. Make sure to sign up on the contacts list. Sign the journal. Like I said, I got the GoFundMe page online, and on the homepage, those 5 universal questions that I was talking about are easy. It takes 2 minutes to fill that out. So go to the homepage and write that down, and get ready for all the stuff that's going to come out of our story in Moab, because that's really the next step of this whole adventure. Thanks again, guys.